Alright, today I'm going to be showing you how I created this custom setup to print two different koozie designs at once. The koozie palette has two stations, each are 3 inches by 6 inches. So I'm going to create this art file within Photoshop that has a little placeholder for the artwork that's 3 by 6, exactly like my palette. And I throw this artwork right inside that little window. I grab some registration marks, create my center lines, and send this to my output printer for my films. Here I am over in the darkroom. I'm cutting the films because some of you may be thinking, why didn't you just measure your palette and then set up your films so that it would fit perfectly? I usually do that, but I had an issue with my output printer that destroyed my confidence in it, where something was printed and it shrunk it like 2% or something, or 3%. So I just printed the art to size and split it, and then measured the exact distance of the center lines of the palette. And now I'm going to set up my art on screen at exactly that dimension. So both of these images are using halftones, and there's a lot of detail, fine detail. So I'm using a 305 mesh here, and I'm going to place the two images in the center of the screen because koozies have a little bit of a give to them. So getting the off contact it's not really hard, but it's just something to consider. If the artwork was closer to the frame, you'd get less pop. So I'm trying to keep it center. Here I'm just measuring the distance between the center line of the design on the left and then the design on the other side, so that it's exactly the same distance as the distance of the center of the two palettes. Once my films are all taped down, I'm going to throw the screen in my exposure unit and just set the time and let those things go. Once the exposure is done, I go over to the darkroom. And because this is a 305, whenever I do higher mesh, I like to take my time with the washout. So here you can see this owl design on one side is coming out really nice. And this other design I call the flow design, this little character that I drew. So once I have the big chunks of emulsion washed out with my main sprayer, I move to the sprayer of my pressure washer because it has a really fine spray. And I'll use the edge of the fanned out water spray just with the pressure washer off to just get some finer detail. You can see that I'm moving the sprayer really fast so that I don't get any of my detail washed out. The halftones on this owl are looking nice. That's going to print great. Over in the production area, I have my screen burned and my palette is ready. I just need to make sure that the palette is in the right place for where the images are burned on screen. The koozies are going to load right to the bottom of the palette. because they have a bottom that will hold them to there, similar to a tote bag. So I'm placing my pallet where the screen needs it to be. And now I'm going to set up my bracket for the pallet. I don't like doing this way, but this is how it goes. These brackets are expensive, and I'm always creating new pallets for different needs. So I'm going to take this bracket off of this sleeve pallet. And affix it to this Koozie pallet. So my pallet's in place. I want to make sure I get my bracket onto the press arm without moving the Koozie pallet. And I want to make sure that my bracket is on properly. I created this little image to show you what that looks like. The image on the right is what a bracket should look like when it's on press. This image on the left is what can happen if you're trying to finagle your bracket. It's just not placed in the right position, but you're trying to make it work. It'll work, but if it looks like this image on the left, it may cause you problems, especially if you're flashing and you're turning the press arms a lot. That thing could fall off of the press arm. So I'm taking a pencil and just marking where the bracket is on the pallet real quick, so that when I do this flip, I don't lose where the bracket needs to be. Now I'm just going to take these screws and punch these in. If your shop does what my shop does, you should be careful about how you put these screws in. You don't want to go pushing in really hard. You want to keep it light and only go in as much as you need, because the more you spin these screws, the more it's going to eat through these boards. This Koozie pallet is made out of melamine. You can get at Home Depot or like a local hardware store. It's essentially like a particle board of sorts. So the more the screws spin on those particles, the more they break apart. So now I got my screen and my pallet is on the bracket, and now I'm going to start to make my final adjustments for printing. Now that my screen's in place, I'll show you what this looks like. When you look closely with printer's eyes, you can see that this flow design is a little bit off to the right, and the owl is a little bit off to the left. But that's okay, because I'm printing this for myself, and that little bit of an adjustment isn't going to be too big of a deal for me. So now I'm putting these Koozies on the pallet to see what my off contact is like. And I'm just testing how that feels on these old Riley Hawkins presses. This is about, I think this came from 2007 or so. You have to use a socket adjustment. So once that's good, the final step is to make sure my Koozies are going to stick down properly. So I'm going to mark where my load lines are for each of the two Koozies is going to be different for each because the designs are different sizes. And now I'm just cleaning this palette so that I can put some palette glue on there. I'm marking my load line for this Koozie and just blue tape. The palette on the left doesn't have any palette tape on it, and I would normally use this palette tape up here to cover that, but it's so small and my palette tape is like 15 inches wide, there'd be a lot of waste, so I decided to just use this blue tape. And I'm going to just bolden up the load line and the center line to make sure everything's clean. So now that those are set up, I'm going to put a little palette adhesive on each of these to make sure that my Koozies stick down nicely. I just use the S-green adhesive for this. Getting the right amount of adhesive down on these little palettes is a bit of a science. You don't want to use too much. And you don't want to put it over where your Koozie is going to be, because then your screen's going to stick down. Oops. So yeah, that's all good now. So I'm just going to tape up my screen. And anytime I use just a part of the screen, I use these little C-clamps to create this little shoulder saver so that I don't have to reach all the way to press for my squeegee. And I'm just doing the last part here that's taping off my registration marks. I always double check that all my knobs are tight on my press heads as the last step of setup. Just because every once in a while you forget to tighten up one. So I always just do a last touch. Now I'm ready for my ink. I'm just using black plastisol from International Coatings. I think it's the Ultimate Black. And I'm ready to print. I'm feeling confident in these. I usually do a test print, but I'm feeling confident in these, so I'm just gonna let this rip. And now it's time to make the batch. So I'm just breezing through production here. This is kind of funny because I could bleed these prints really easily by hitting it twice, but one hit is like just a little bit under a really consistent opaque black. But again, when you're printing for yourself, everything is so much easier because you can make those choices without having to reach out to the client. So thanks for watching. If you do anything with a similar Koozie palette setup, I want to see it. Send it to me so I can check out what you're working on. Until next time.